Okay, so welcome back. Um, Forest Pack is now working for me. My licensing is sorted out. So, as a reminder, what were we doing? We were going over shaders, creating the shader for one of our plants, right? And as I showed, I was using this forest color inside my diffuse slot, and doing the same thing on my front and the back. For these purposes, I'm going to just copy this guy down. You will have named, kind of like what I showed you guys. This would be leaf B, so on and so forth. There was one question about consistency of color and concept and whatnot when you start to get into these shaders for your plants and trees and different types of plants and whatnot. And there's a fine line there of what's realistic and what has gone completely kind of run amok. So I find that generally I will start my shaders with in kind of the fashion that we talked about, with a texture or a map in the diffuse slot, and then I'll throw color corrections in there, for those maps, simply so that once I start rendering, I can kind of start controlling and manipulating the overall, look of it maybe a little bit more. Like if this one plant, like the leaf that I put in there was just too damn yellow, whereas like everything else is like green with blue hues, and this was green with yellow hues. That little difference can really mess with you. So throwing, not at the stock level, but at the diffuse texture level, where you would have like your composite and you would have your diffuse texture here, where your V-Ray color is embedding a color correct here first before you kind of come out and do your vertex color and any other compositing that you might want on top of that. That can help once you start to, render and whatnot. So that being said, we've got our plant, and the other thing, before I start to do forest pack work, I will take my plant and make myself a couple of variations, given new seeds. And I don't really worry too much about scale, because scale I can control. Now if I want it to be like a fledgling plant versus a non-fledgling plant, that's different, and that I will do. Like these are full-grown plants, and then I make another variation of that plant that's like an infant plant, and I just kind of make some sort of variation here. Sometimes I'll go into each of these individually and make slight tweaks to them just to vary them up even more. But generally I do like 3 to 5 of these. Now one thing you'll notice is I have not converted these to mesh yet, but one thing that we do need to do in order for this to work correct is set on your guys, convert to mesh, and convert to mesh. So this, when it renders through Forest Pack, these guys should properly render without meshing them. Okay, so this is one nice feature. I like this when I'm kind of in pre-production and I'm maybe still tweaking my plants and whatnot. I can scatter them around, and I can still make updates to these, and my scattered versions will also update, which is nice. That gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, once you go into production, full-on production, and you're rendering the shot, it becomes a little bit of a memory game as to whether or not to do it, to keep them live, mesh them at render time, or to bake them and carry the memory up front. And for a lot of reasons, it might be better to mesh them first and then or mesh them before you do your final renders. What you can do though, if you can keep these live for as long as you want, and then at any point, if you want, you can throw your edit mesh on top of them and you can collapse this guy, and it's still referencing the same piece of geo. Forest Pack doesn't care. And then you will have collapsed this down to a mesh. You could further then on top of that collapse that down to a V-Ray proxy, and Forest Pack doesn't care. It's like Honey Badger. It don't give a shit. It will keep referencing that same piece of geo. So that's nice when you're not totally done. You can kind of have placeholder plants and things like that, and then continually update them. So I recommend to do this as long as you can, but at some point you really need to know, like, positively what is your memory footprint for this scene. Do you need to prune by camera? Do you need to break your environment and whatnot out into multiple shots and start deleting things? These are the decisions that we make once we really know what we're working with, but this allows me to keep it live for as long as possible. So I have my 3 variations. I have my shader set up correctly. Now I want to create a Forest Pro. So you go under E2 Software, and I will find it. E2 Software, Forest Pro, and you can click on a piece of geo, or you can click on a spline that you have predetermined. So this is telling me, do I want to limit by camera visibility? And initially I don't. You can come back and you can tell it to do this after the fact. So I get these lovely planes. Alright, and then there's lots of menus and flyouts in this. Yeah, it seems daunting, but it's pretty simple. So by default, we start with this default piece of geo, and it's a template. It's one plane, right? This is what I'm calling. I could say I want 2 planes. I could say I want curved planes. Very fancy. Or you can say you want a custom object, and then you can pick that custom object by clicking on the none and then making call. And so it's barking at me, you have a really high poly count, and I'm not going to do that. Well, I am going to do it, but I'm going to show you where to do it yourself. If you come all the way to the bottom under display, and right now we're rendering mesh and we're displaying adaptive, and I like to display point clouds and set these guys depending on the mesh and whatnot. You can set them at 20%, 5%, whatever you want. Okay, and then I'm going to come back up and I'm going to add a new item. And oops, I'm going to again select custom object, and I'm going to pick number 2 and just tell it no. And then I'm going to add another object. Shocker. Again, no. So now I've scattered about this fantastically modeled terrain, my fantastically modeled plant. And if we render, I should really put an icon on that. Lots of should've, could've. You'll see we have our super amazing terrain with our super awesome plants. And if at any point now, let's say, just so you can't call me a liar, if I wanted to turn off the leaves on this guy and turn off inner stalks, so these guys are just outer stalks, I can do that, and I can render again. And now we have these other plants with just outer stalks doing their thing. Okay, so this can be super handy. It's also, so we haven't really covered wind yet. But let's say I added a wind modifier to these guys. So once you get into Forest Pack and you want to use that, you will come down to Animation, this Animation tab. It's the second one from the bottom. And you're going to tell it to follow geometry. And these guys aren't animating right now, so it shouldn't make any difference. For whatever reason, this guy like spun, and it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and you can set maps, you can set frame ranges, you can do all sorts of fun stuff. For a GrowFX tree or plant, you know, this just to follow geometry is all you need to do. And we can render again. Alright, and we get the same thing. That is awesome. Alright, so now a couple of ways that you can customize this, okay? Well, real quick, first, before I customize my Forest Pack, I do want to show you one thing. Let's say you're working in Forest Pack, right, and your terrain changes. You went back into ZBrush, you sculpted something else, and you tweaked it. Now, what's going to happen is visually you're going to be like, you know, my stuff is not, it's not sticking to the surface. And it is. And my dirty trick for doing, like, for bringing it back when I have, like, let's say you have 20 Forest Packs in your scene and they're referencing a piece of geo that you made a topology change to. You can go in and update them, and I'll show you how to do that. Or you can just start a render. And if it's a long, you know, if it's a long render, you can just cancel out of it, and they still will now have jumped back to where they were, which is nice. This can save you a ton of time. So now I can change the topology again, make it less hilly, and again you can see like those guys are still, they're still floating, right? But if I, now the other way to do this is to come to Forest Pack and come down to your surface, and you want to, so you can see this is the surface, it's box 01, and you want to update surface data. And now they'll jump back down, right? So all is good in the world. Alright, so the next thing you have are these areas, right? These are the areas you want your stuff to grow on. And by default, because I picked a piece of geometry, it's going to grow all over the surface. Now the way that Forest Pack works out of the gate by default is this XY, and it's basically just like taking, as if there were an imaginary plane up here, that it's emitting these guys down onto the surface. Because you'll notice like nothing's growing on the sides, nothing's growing on the bottoms. And this type of mode works well for something like this. Now when it's a you know, concave object, or you want stuff on these side surfaces, this mode will fall apart and you're going to want to go to UV. But most of the time we're using a mode like this. Rock faces though, where you want like moss in an under, you know, kind of like a recessed cliff or something like that, you're going to need to use UV mode, because this is not going to project down into a like a nook or a cranny. Okay. All right. So this is surface area with that, you know, checked on, and you can't get rid of this one. This will always be there. But what you can do is, let's get rid of some stuff. Come into a top view, and you can draw yourself a spline. And we can, whatever, move that there. This spline does not have to be up high or down low. It doesn't matter if the spline is above your Forest Pack object. It could be down here and it's still going to work. And now what I can do is I can come back to my Forest Pack object. I'm going to create a spline area. It's going to have me pick my spline. And right now you're going to be like, well, that didn't do anything. and it doesn't. You're not going to see any change until you come to this surface area and you turn it off. Okay? You can't delete this guy. It will always exist. But you can set this to an include or an exclude. And right now you're like, well, what happened? Like, there's nothing there. Well, that's because I turned this guy off. And now you'll see you need this surface area on and a line for an exclude. If you want to do an exclude, you need, one to include first, and then you can exclude. And the nice thing here is, this is fully, real time, which is cool. If you get a ton in here, though, you will see a lag, but it's not significant. So then the other thing to do with this, real quick, I want to talk organization here. All right, so when we're doing something like this, you'll see it made this forest template layer, and you're gonna have that, okay? But what I generally do, add a couple of groups here. One, I'm gonna name it useful, and the other one, I'm going to name this E_forest pack. Plants or something. And move that guy down. And then I will create a new layer. Wow, it's been a long day. And then I would call this, E_forest pack, whatever plant this is. This could be my, bushes. I don't know. And come back up to organize, and I want my forest template in my useful, as I said. And I want my forest pack bushes in my forest pack plants. Say that 3 times fast. Let's say okay. Alright. So I've got my bush, and I've got this line. And the line I will rename and call this area bushes. And I'm going to add this to that layer. Apparently I really had to think about adding that spline to that layer. Alright, and if I turn this off, I still have my forest pack object hanging out in the world layer. Don't put alt materials on there. I don't even have alt materials assigned. Well, apparently it's being goofy. And let's render to make sure it's not doing something I really don't want it to do. Alright. Still looks like the purple piece of crap in my awesome plant that it did before. So, it didn't make it any better, which is quite disappointing. I like to move these guys up. I know it said it doesn't matter, but it's totally a preference. I like to move them up so when I am in top view, I can see them. Sorry. Okay, the other reason why I put that spline in this layer with this guy is that if you get lots of these, let's say you've pine trees, you've got ferns, you've got bushes, you've got all these different things, and you want to be able to edit your bushes, you want these splines, if you want to turn everything else off, you want to be able to find these guys easy. And oftentimes I have, really what'll happen is alright, this is area bushes dense, or it might be, so this forest pack, and I also rename these guys as well. So this would be forest bushes, and then dense, right? So that might be one forest pack. And right now it's well, that's not very dense. So what you can do is covered areas a little bit. I'm not going to, well, I do want to show you guys fall-offs. I might not get to everything on this one lesson. We're going to have a couple of different lessons on this. I will cover pretty much everything in Forest Pack, though. So if there is something that you're like, hey, you glossed over that, I will be coming back to it. So with these distribution maps, you can cover the spread, you know, what they're doing. And then you also have this units, and this is how many over, you know, the surface, how dense this is going to make them. You can also see you have this like fit to scene. Now on bigger scenes, this is going to become really important, because you'll see, like, you know, you end up with this like resolution that's just insane. It's like 3 feet or something like that, and it's just not working. So it is kind of a good habit to come in and like pick your start. So I'll say like my furthest most corner and pick my end and pick, you know, this corner. Okay, so it just gave me these dimensions. Now I can come in with my threshold number, this percentage here, and I can make it more dense or less dense, and, you know, less to a point. And then now if I need to tweak out, because what you're going to run into is like you're gonna ask me like I can't get enough detail or enough resolution out of my forest pack, and that's frequent. So this threshold is one way to do it, by picking your start and end. Another way to do it is by creating multiple forest packs. So I'll make one like, you know, dense, and these are my medium bushes. So this could be dense large, right? So I'm gonna make, you know, multiple bush types here. These would be my grow effects bush large. Well, we want that. We want our padding at the end, otherwise it would just mess everything up and Max will go crazy, you know, so on and so forth. So I would name this bush, or, you know, bush is dense large. I would name the area then dense large. Okay, then let's say I want to use the same bush, but I want this area to be, you know, little bushes. So I could come in and small shrub. Make another forest pack, pick that object, tell it no for the moment. And oh, now one thing that I do a lot, and I'm going to show you this right out the gate because I do this a lot. I make presets. Alright, so right now, like, this forest pack is, you can save this guy. You can come into your general tab and you can type like bushes dense, wow, large. And then you can come to another one, and now if I click on this, you'll see I have all sorts of other ones. My other guy did not save. I must have not. Oh yeah. Important. Yeah, save current. I do it so much I forget how to do it. But I forget how to do everything all the time. Yes, I do want to make a preset. Alright, so now we can come back to this other guy. And I don't want it to be bushes dense or anything, but let's say I had a forest pack that's referencing like 15 different objects, and I want to use those objects again, but with a different variation. Maybe I'm going to make these guys more brown, maybe I'm going to make them smaller, maybe I'm going to make them less dense. And you can, you know, copy and paste a forest pack object. Sometimes that will crash your shit. What will not crash it, though, is making a preset that will reference those objects. And we'll say this is bushes, small. And then you can come into here and pick bushes dense large and say yes. Okay, so it's thrown a bunch of bushes over there, but no big deal. So 1, this guy is set to exclude, so we just switch him to include, and he doesn't know what surface he's supposed to be on, but again, we can come to our surface. There he is. And pick that. Alright, so now we've got, you know, bushes everywhere, and they're not smaller though. So next, this transform tab. Generally, I check yes. Yes, I want free stuff. Alright, so I use this scale in here, and you can make these guys, you know, all these guys are going to be much tinier. Does it look like it's scattering these small guys everywhere? You little rat. You are. Because, remember I said that surface area, if you pick a surface, you can't get rid of it. That guy is checked on. So turn him off. Now all is right in the world. Okay, so now I have, you know, these little bushy dudes. And these guys are small, and then, as you'll see, I don't know why I don't just close these things. I just really like using my middle mouse or rotate. So they've got a little bit of rotation going, you know, in the X and the Y, and then they're able to, you know, spin up to 360 degrees. So that would be distributing, you know, these two guys using include, exclude splines, using surfaces, turning them off. The next thing that I do a lot is, look at that, came right to what I want. This is in the surface node, okay? I'm on my forest bushes dense large, alright? And I'll use this altitude range or I'll use slope range, and I want to limit. Okay, so you see, like, well, nothing happened. If you start to bring this number down, now you'll see we're only getting plants at the peaks where there's no more than a 13-degree angle, or in the valleys. And this is a nice way to control, like, if you've got a whole bunch of topology and you want things in flat areas, you can limit this slope. You can also use these density fall-offs and scale fall-offs. I highly recommend getting used to using these. If you haven't become comfortable with curves and throwing curves on everything with grow effects, this will bring it home. So this I'll set, like, let's bring this guy back up. And all right, so 25. So in this way, I can kind of come in here and mess with this density. And give it kind of a more realistic fall off sometimes. And then also, if you turn on this scale fall off based on this slope range, and we edit that, these guys can get, you know, smaller. And let's 0.25. We still want them at 100 or 33. Basically 33. Our max is 32, so we can take this to, oh, well, 0.31. Same thing. Okay, so these guys at 32, they're still 100, and then they'll scale down if the angle is, as the angle decreases or increases. So from 0, they're bigger, and as it gets closer to 32, they're going to scale down. Or quite the opposite, sorry. So those guys are great for giving some like natural fall off and whatnot. The other thing where you can put curves, and I recommend that as well, is in the fall off density. You can edit these curves in your include and exclude. So you can scale or... Alright, so this is my include. This is talking about the spline here. And just watch this like edge, basically. What is this guy? He's set to exclude. So you'll see within like 12 feet of this guy, it's getting less and less dense. And to make this more visible, let's just turn this entirely off and come to a top. Okay, so this is with it off, this is with it on. It's not going to get rid of everything, but it does, you know, it certainly tweaks it. And again, you can throw a curve in this and, you know, mess with it to your heart's, you know, content. But this will help you to give, like, nice natural transitions between, like, you know, a very dense area to then, like, a smaller smattering of stuff. And everything isn't just these, like, hard lines and looks like you threw a forest pack on with an area and didn't find any of the fall-offs. So those are really important. I encourage you to check out these different types of spread amounts or you know, maps and types. You can do a lot of cool stuff. You can do bands. You can use a custom map. So that's this guy right here. Well, right now, sorry. This guy right here is the map that it's referencing. One important thing to note is that by default, this cheeky little program, must be on my x86. So this is important if you if you're using a render farm and you need to render on a network machine. Where are they? No. I always forget where they put these. Oh yeah, here we go. Images. God. Okay. These guys, by default, it will always pull from your C. Okay, so it keeps referencing this. So if you have network machines, you want to render on your farm, you're going, let's say, you know, you're going to render your project on your farm. You're going to try to send this, and you're immediately going to get an error because this forest pack is looking at a distribution map that is located on your C. So something that I always do is take all of these maps, copy them, paste them into my working drive on the network, and then repath with Asset Tracker or whatever map plugins that you might have in order to process your shit. So just one important thing I want to make you guys aware of, that will bite you in the butt. So that's just good practice. All right, so I'm just gonna stick with this spread guy. You guys should. I encourage you to check other ones out. All right, tree editor. We're not gonna do that today. We're not gonna do that. We'll get into that. All right. Let's see. So the other thing I wanted to show you real quick. All right, let me just. So nice. We're gonna go high res. Oh. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that was on. I could take a phone call. That would be real fun. Alright. So, it's looking like these guys are not totally behaving. Let me set this guy override. Oh, it might be. It might just be that my, it's very subtle. Yeah, okay. So, once you get into some maps and stuff like that and you start to make some more drastic changes, you'll see that these become much more distinct. So let's make you something annoying. Okay, so it's not doing everything because I have this set from 0 to 0. So now if I set this to 100, all of my leaves now should be getting a random color, somewhere in between that green and that red value. Some are going to get the green, some will get pure red, but they all kind of rainbow within those values. So you can do the same thing in your stalks as well. So like you have some plants that are more brown and some that are more green and so on and so forth. These guys are working. They are doing what I want them to. It's just it's not entirely visible. Yeah. It is giving, it's helping with variation. And, alright, the last thing I wanted to show you is, let's say we have a camera. It's like, whatever, right here. And we make this camera, and then we select our forest pack. And this is a nice way to be able to, you know, once you've got this all like set up, you got it looking the way you want, and you want to start to kind of cull things out in your scene, you can come into this camera guy, and you can auto assign active view. The other important things to look at are these clipping planes, your back offset. So this is 32 feet behind, and this is what do we have here? 328,000 feet beyond. But just make sure that you've got yourself covered. And then this expand percentage is your overshoot on either side. Okay, so now if I render, we're going to see lots of awesome plants right up front and center. Amazing. I'm just going to kill that. Now if we go back to a perspective view, it's going to make me a liar. It's just not refreshing. Come here. It might be that there's enough of an overshoot that it's still keeping those guys. Normally in the perspective you can still see it, even though, like, you know, it's got it set. Yeah, it's setting it to that camera. Hello. Well, it's just a redraw issue. It is working. It will work. Okay, and that will conclude this session on grow effects. I wanted you guys to get enough so you can start to look at scattering your stuff. We're going to get into some other, like, nothing that I'm going to cover in the future is you're going to be like, oh damn, like, you showed that, and then I'm gonna have to rescatter everything. These are tried and true tools. I use them all the time. I encourage you, to check out other features if you want. There certainly are other tutorials on the GrowFX one, or on the E2 website. There are other ways to plant as well. If you come into where to go? It's up. It's areas. So you can paint. You can like come onto a surface, and you can like quite literally come in and pick your paintbrush and start to paint. And then you can convert to a spline. Painted area converted to a spline. Yes, I do. And then you can move this guy up. Oh, nope, I want my spline. Paint area. Conveniently, his pivot is at the origin, and you can see now I've got that painted area converted into a spline. This, however, is, as you can see, a bit unwieldy. It's great, it's super cool, but in production, where like, I think somebody asked the question, how often do you have to get into somebody else's file? And that happens for us. So if somebody did this all the time and they just like painted these nifty things, and then on a like shop basis I needed to edit something, and I literally had to come in here and like move verts around, or I have to optimize these, like, imagine this person has 50 of these splines in their scene, and I now have to optimize all of them, and that's a major pain in the butt. So it's a cool feature. I certainly in like at your home, in a void, in a vacuum, that's a great little thing to have. Add forest objects is again, and you can add like collision objects, basically. Where to go? It's up here, and I'll get into that stuff, but if you want to kind of look ahead on that, you can. You've got enough on your plate this week, I think, to kind of take you through. Yeah, here they are. So this should get you started, give you a good foundation on Forest Pack and what you'll be doing with it, and how Forest Pack relates to Grow Effects, what you should be doing with your shaders, how you should be thinking about those and setting them up. Alright, talk to you guys soon.